I just didn't bring thick enough socks. That's all I'm saying.
And you have no Gertie at your feet to warm you up.
I have no Gertie at my feet. There will be no Gertie. Hello, and welcome to Expected Own Goals, College Edition. I'm your host, Eric Morgan.
I'm Evan Davis. Yes, it's college week here at XOG. We're going to be talking to the WOSO Independent's Chris Henderson later on in the show, and hopefully having a very special guest, college-related guest, for Patreon on Thursday. But there's some news, some of it interesting, some of it deeply unpleasant, that has occurred in the last week we're going to talk about. But maybe we start with the thing that happened right after we finished recording last Monday, which is that Savvy King got traded to Angel City from Bay FC for what amounts to a total of, I think, $300,000 in intra-league transfer funds spread out over 2 years, as well as a 10% sell-on fee if she ends up transferring elsewhere after her time at Angel City. What do you make of this?
Obviously, we had Ariel on last week, friend of the pod. We love so many of our Bay people. I think they kind of got a steal in terms of the amount of money they got in return for a player who performed at Savvy King's level. That's not to say that Savvy King doesn't have a very high ceiling and a lot of athletic potential, and she might not fully actualize that. But even that is covered with the sell-on clause on some level. Bay's main challenges going into this offseason were A, to get out from underneath the Dana Castellanos contract. Mission accomplished. And B, figure out what to do with Savvy King. And what they've done is turn that into a whole heap of cash and potentially some future value for a player who I think had been relegated to the nether regions of Albertine Montoya's mind when it came to what to do with toward the end of last year. And if you have a player who is not getting played and you can make a profit off of them, I think generally speaking, that's exactly what you should do. And I think that's exactly what Bay did. So A+ for me, as far as Bay's end of this deal is concerned. I think on the flip side, Angel City, actually, this is a good bet. As far as young, talented, potentially center backs to go take a bet on, I don't like the cash amount, but I like the player.
You use the key word just there, center back.
Yeah, that's the one.
Which is the real hinge on which this whole deal turns. Savvy King hadn't spent much time at a very high level playing as a fullback before she came to Bay FC. She was asked to not only learn a new position on the fly as a 19-year-old with only 1 year of college experience under her belt, but also to do it for an expansion team that had a lot of very aggressive press and possess ideas in terms of its tactical philosophy. It's a lot to put on the shoulders of one player. And she was bad. She was quite bad. She was shockingly bad for a number 2 overall pick. In fact, she was one of the worst performing number 2 overall picks we've ever seen. But there are a lot of caveats to all of that.
Exactly.
You look at Angel City and their fullback depth is just fine, and their center back depth is quite thin. It stands to reason that King is now in line to take the other starting center back spot alongside Sarah Gordon or be the first bench piece in central defense should Gordon or Alana Kennedy get injured. Now, the thing is, we still kind of don't know what this is all going to result in for King or for Angel City because we don't have any professional tape or data of King playing as a center back to go on. What we have is that she was really bad in 2024, and it's been very, very rare that a player who is that bad in their rookie year turns it around in their second season.
Yeah, but I also think that that's a difference between what we have seen as case examples over time as opposed to like a predictive outcome for Savvy King.
I know. And in fact, I wrote all about this at Equalizer.
Yeah, you did. My read on this situation is there were so many pieces that needed to go right for Bay FC from the start. A team that had never played together, that literally were theoretical until 11 months ago. Savvy King was just a piece that didn't fit. She got thrown into the deep end. She got put in a position where she really floundered. But I actually don't put that as much on her as I put that on the pains of being an expansion team.
Now, here's something interesting, and this is part of what I wrote about as well. If you compare her to another rookie fullback on an expansion team, namely Zoe Burns, late of this parish and now member of Fleury, Zoe Burns was defensively excellent on a team that was defensively disastrous, who had also never played together before. If you want to use your variable by age and you want to look at another teenage rookie fullback, you look at Giselle Thompson. Giselle Thompson didn't blow the doors off the place, but Giselle Thompson had a nice rookie season. It's not necessarily completely out of the hands of Savvy King's talent or lack of same that her season went the way that it did, because players in certain environments analogous to hers were able to step up. Now, the counterpoint, of course, is, well, neither Giselle Thompson nor Zoe Burns had all of the things that Savvy King had to deal with at the same time. They had a couple of them here, a couple of them there, and it might have just been a perfect storm with the left back situation at Bay FC in the first half of the season.
This is also just the problem of playing players out of position, which is not something that Giselle Thompson or Zoe Burns had to deal with last year. I don't think either of us think that this is the end of the road for a Savvy King, or that Angel City got fleeced, because look at how bad she was out of position in this one team. It is that for Savvy King to succeed, she needs to be understood as a player, and understood meaning being put in the right position. She will, as best as I can tell, benefit from that at Angel City, and have, I believe in Sarah Gordon, a really, really good person to either partner with or to learn from. Mentorship does matter. The human element of this is important. And no matter what happens with Savvy King's next season, she is going to a place where the situation on the ground is better for her.
But what is also important for us to underline is that we are entering a very high variance space with King's future. And so as much as we are comfortable saying that just because she was bad out of position as a rookie, expansion, yada, 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 teenager, as bad as she was given those circumstances, we have every reason to think that she will improve. It is also a fact that you cannot flip it around and say, well, now that she is going to be a center back in a different team with a year of experience under her belt, that definitely automatically means that she is going to be great.
No.
And it's how I concluded my piece at Equalizer, is there are so many paths. She could slough all of this off and be the player we all expected her to be at a UNC, and she goes and she plays for the U.S. women's national team in Brazil in 2027 or here in L.A. in 2028. It could also be that last year was the proof of her ceiling and she is a total bust. But it is also possible that she could just become somebody like Dorian Bailey, her former teammate, where you stink it up as a rookie, you move positions in your sophomore year, you kind of get moved around the field a bunch, but you keep putting in starter level minutes and you end up potentially winning a championship. You just have the ideal middle class NWSL career, which is, those are the players I always love to pay attention to. You don't have to be a superstar and you don't have to be a washout. You can just be someone who plays 6,000, 7,000 minutes across their career and becomes a very central element of the NWSL while not necessarily having to carry the fate of the league on your shoulders the way that a lot of USWNT superstars have to. That's also very real for King.
That's right. There are 3 basic buckets that her career can go into moving from here. She is this bad. She's not nearly this bad, but she's sort of a bang average or around average NWSL player. And she was a misused superstar in the making.
Yeah.
I do not have a lot of confidence about which of those 3 buckets she is going to fall in. The only thing that gives me encouragement about not the bombs out of the league category is that for a very long time, talent evaluators have been very high on her. Talent evaluators miss, but scouting is a component of this game that is important. And I think there are smart people at Angel City. Mark Parsons is a smart dude. If Mark Parsons likes something that he sees on tape, I am willing and inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt. The same thing goes for Emma Hayes in bringing Savvy King into national team camps. I am inclined to say these people haven't written her off, so I think that the least likely outcome is that she busts and bombs out of the league for me. I don't think I'm a lot more confident than saying that I think is the least likely. Her becoming a superstar is probably also just as unlikely. The middle path strikes me as most likely, but I have pretty low faith in all ways.
As it often is, the middle path is the most likely. Yeah, I mean, listen, nearly 1,300 minutes as a 19-year-old. That means something.
Yeah, that's good.
And as you say, Parsons is no fool and has a really good eye for recruitment. So if he's bringing her in, that must mean something. I also think that I would have been much less inclined to look rosily on King's future if this wasn't the move. And I'm not even necessarily talking about Angel City, but just moving to a new team where she gets to be a center back. It really changes the complexion of like what the future holds for her. If she turns it around and her position weighted net G plus per 96, which focuses on dribbling, net passing, and net defense for fullbacks, negative 0.07 per 96 last year. Only 5 rookie fullbacks in the history of the league since 2016 were worse than that. If she manages to swing around and become a net positive on possession value as a center back for Angel City this year, that will be unprecedented.
Yeah.
She has every possibility of doing it, but we got to wait and see. I think I commented last week about Lexi Missimo, how the burden of proof is on Missimo's shoulders to prove that she's worthy of getting into the national team and being a superstar. The burden of proof is not on Savvy King in nearly the same way, given everything that she had to deal with last year. It's very wait and see, but if you want to be cautiously, and I do underline cautiously, optimistic about her 2025 season, you would be justified in doing so.
If you're looking for points of pessimism in the name of like Savvy King will be a hit at Angel City, it's that Angel City might not be a hit at Angel City.
Right.
Angel City is like, she is going from a team that was headed in the right direction, not with her, to a team that I think is headed in the right direction, but has a deeper hole to climb out of. Angel City is a mess, and that is not a new piece of information to anyone listening to this podcast. They may prove to this season turn it around in ways that we don't quite anticipate, but right now, Savvy King, the best thing about going to Angel City is she can compete for minutes there. The worst thing about going to Angel City is Angel City's defense is trash. Or was very bad last year. They have individually talented players and still conceded a lot of huge goals.
The best thing about Bay FC's 2024 is that they developed a midfield comprised of a bench number 10/winger and 2 fullbacks as their central midfield base, based on where those players were playing in 2023. And it worked. But they still could use some depth there and potentially even someone who could come in and be a starter right out of the gate. And they signed Duke's Hannah Bibar to a 3-year contract. Bibar, who is going to be 23 for the 2025 season, was called into U.S. Women's National Team senior camp in January without ever previously getting a call-up as a replacement, was eligible to be called into the Futures camp instead since it was U23, but went straight to the seniors, was on the market for quite a while, and has landed at Bay, a team that has great need for her position. And man, oh man, this kid can fucking ball. Like, in 1,106 minutes against ranked teams, top 25 teams last year at Duke, the ACC it's a cauldron.
The best of the best. The hardest conference to play in.
She completed 3.5 long balls per 96, 7 interceptions, 15.5 ball recoveries per 96 minutes. She won 9 defensive duels per game at a 76% success rate. And on the other side of things, 9.5 passes into the final third completed at a 65.5% or so completion rate. 20 forward passes per 96 at a 63.5% completion rate in 1,106 minutes against ranked teams. And she had to play UNC multiple times. She had to play Wake Forest, Notre Dame, like basically the top 5 ranked teams. She had to play more than once. And those are the kinds of numbers she was putting up as a number 6, number 8 hybrid. This kid can ball.
Yeah, I wish she were 2 years younger and putting up those numbers, but she put up really good numbers in college in her senior season and is going to a place that seems to really know how to harness those things. She takes Alex Loera's role, and there is an Alex Loera-sized hole. And if she is 80% the player of Alex Loera in terms of performance on the field in her rookie season, Bay's got themselves a real winner.
Like we said, with every human being who ever enters this league from college, unless they are Trinity Rodman or Sophia Smith, you could completely blow this. That could happen. Or you could just be a completely meh fine player and wash out after 3 or 4 years. Who knows?
You have high confidence in Hannah Bieber, though.
And I don't have high confidence in every college player who puts up decent numbers.
You want to move on and talk Midge Purse?
Yeah, we talked about it on Patreon, but for those who are main feed only, you fucking weirdos, Midge Purse re-signed a 1-year deal with Gotham. She's back at Gotham. We don't know on what kind of money. I think it's probably pretty decent money. This is essentially, I thought the other day, this is sort of like the early 1-year Clayton Kershaw contracts where he really jacked up the AAV, but his injury history meant that he was never going to get like a multi-year deal. So like 2017, I think, is like when he signed like a 1-year, $30.5 million thing. That sort of feels like what this Purse contract probably is. She needs a bounce back in order to demonstrate both that she can get back into the U.S. women's national team pool, but also on the cusp of 30, get a big payday in the fall.
This is the most sensible move, I believe, for all parties involved. It is a short contract that if Purse crushes it during, she can still get that last big payday in her career. She's going to a system where she already knows how to operate. There's a little bit of a logjam with Gabby Portillo, but Purse is more than talented enough to find some serious minutes.
In the absence of Lynn Biondolo, someone can invert and flip around and play on the left. I have every confidence that Portillo or Purse can do that, can pull that job.
Exactly. Should Midge Purse have moved on from Gotham last season? Maybe. But given what has happened, given the injury, her returning to Gotham, I think, is probably as good an outcome as she could hope for. And frankly, given what Gotham has lost this offseason, probably a pretty good outcome for Gotham as well.
Yeah, for sure. She was the last domino to fall with regard to high-profile free agents, impact free agents.
Yeah, the last game changer out there.
Yeah, as we talked about on Patreon, the list is getting pretty thin. It's basically Maggie Doherty Howard, Ciara King, the only two left who logged more than 1,000 minutes in 2024. And you throw Olivia Athens in there if you want to set the threshold at 500 minutes. It's going to be hard to find an outfield player in the free agent market who you think can really be a difference maker in the 11.
All right. You want to move on to the really unpleasant news? Just gloss over that before we get Chris Henderson on?
Yeah, I wish we didn't have to. I mean, the first bit is good news, I think. 3 different state attorneys general, specifically the DC Attorney General, Illinois Attorney General, and New York Attorney General, announced a settlement with the NWSL Players Association that is setting up a $5 million restitution fund paid out by the league to players in compensation for the abuse and harassment that was suffered over the first, basically, decade of the league's existence. This has been a long time coming. This is but one byproduct of no fewer than 3 investigations into the shit hitting the fan at the end of 2021 with Rory Dames, Richie Burke, and Paul Riley, which then, of course, metastasized to a great many other individuals. The NWSL has no choice but to pay this money. The third-party administrator is going to be overseeing it. The process by which players can apply for and earn some of this money is sort of up in the air, but it's not just the money. It's that the league is now mandated to put investigatory and enforcement powers and mechanisms in place that are much more stringent than what had existed before in the event that future abuse or harassment arises. This, I think, was something that a lot of people feared was just going to get, if not necessarily swept under the rug, but like forgotten about, just given like what we talk about it all the time, what the league is now in 2025 versus what it was at the start of 2022. This now ensures that the wrongs done, at least in some small part in those early seasons, are going to be made right and won't be forgotten. And I think that's really, really significant.
I agree. I would have loved to have seen a larger sum of money being handed out because it's being dispersed among a lot of parties.
Yeah.
But it is a step, at least some measure of restitution for having to endure horrific conditions.
Yeah.
So that's a good piece of news. Now on to the horrific conditions. Oh my God, Mape Leon.
Yeah.
Heaven.
If you haven't seen this, Barcelona and Espanyol played on Sunday. There was some physical altercations between some Espanyol players and Barcelona players. One in particular that occurred between Mapi León and Daniela Caracas. Hard to imagine when you watch the video or look at still images. It's hard to argue that where Mapi León's hand ends up, that this wasn't a very deliberate and intentional form of pretty serious assault. That Mapi has vigorously denied and has tried to claim that she was actually just going to like touch the player's leg in a scene of camaraderie. I do not know how you could ever think that that is what's going on when you're watching the video. And Mapi really went from zero to Donald Trump by saying, that's not what happened, but if you say that it happens, I'm going to sue you. I feel bad for you, but don't keep talking about this or my lawyers are going to get involved. It is as shitty a reaction as you could possibly have to all of this incident. And for me personally, Mapi León was the face of moral righteousness around the Las Quince affair, not only in spearheading Las Quince, but also when a lot of those players got shut out of the Spanish women's national team. She never made herself available for selection again. She said there was so much more work that needed to be done before you could feel like the Spain women's national environment was a safe and a supportive and a healthy and thriving one. And then for something like this to not only happen, but for her to react in public the way that she did is just...
It's disgusting.
Yeah, it's despicable. It's horrendous, given the history of or what Mapi León has tried to represent in the past. Makes it all the more poisonous, I think.
The video is one galling thing. The response to the video is a completely different level of galling as far as I'm concerned. The sort of brash, unapologetic nature of it. And I don't believe that's being lost in translation by me. This is right up there with some of the most vile on-pitch behavior I've ever seen. And I think a lengthy ban and fine would be fully warranted.
Yeah, FootPro, the union that represents players in Spain, are looking into it, but FootPro does not have collective bargaining agreement with Liga FA or the RFEF, the federation. And so how much teeth, whatever inquiries they're going to make will really have is worrisome. And of course, again, the irony that this is involving Mapi León, everything that I just said points back right to what Las Quince was all about and what the Rubiales affair was representing, that there is no safety net for players in Spain when things like this happen. Daniela Caracas has no form of protection other than her club saying we are going to make our legal team available to her should it come to that, which is great. And it's wonderful that they're supporting her in this, but it shouldn't be the sole responsibility of the club to try and find restitution for her player. Like the league, the union, and the federation all need to be stepping up here.
Yep. Absolutely. We will continue tracking this story as it evolves, but maybe now we go on to a fun conversation with the great Chris Henderson.
He's been on the show before. We get into what he thinks about the players out of college who have signed, what he thinks about the state of player movement in the absence of the NWSL draft. He's obviously knee-deep in the college world, and he has a certain POV, but I think he's also quite realistic about what's actually going to harm the college game in the long term. And spoiler alert, it's not the draft. But it was a very illuminating conversation. As always, whenever I talk to Chris, I learned a lot, and I think you will too.
Yeah. So here is our interview with Chris Henderson.
The biggest news that came out of the NWSL's new collective bargaining agreement last fall was that for the first time ever in a major professional sports league in America, there was going to be no collegiate or any kind of draft as an entry mechanism to become a member of the league. This has left a lot of people wondering how this was going to actually affect the acquisition of college talent. And up to this point, I think Eric and I probably agree that this has been a pretty resounding success, at least from a player's perspective. But we have the foremost expert on such things to tell us where we might need to appreciate some more nuance on the issue. And so from Woso Independent, please welcome Chris Henderson. Chris.
Hey.
Before we get to the real juicy stuff, I want to just reflect on the 29 players who have signed contracts out of college with NWSL clubs up to this point, and we're recording on Monday, February 10th. At least numerically, this is basically 2 full rounds of players. Would these have been the first 28 or 29 off the board had a draft taken place in January?
Probably not. I mean, I'm looking at like some of the NRIs, some of the invitees and trialists, and like it remains to be seen, like, if they sign. But I mean, I think Simone Jackson and Kat Berry for 2 are, would be top 20, top 25 players without question. We don't know who actually would have declared, so it's a little tough to kind of measure. But I don't think the 29 that have signed are would be my top 29 in any case.
Mm-hmm. How about the top 5? Have all the top 5 signed in your mind, or all the top 10?
They've signed somewhere. I mean, because Lexi Missimo would have been like top 5 or top 10 easily. I mean, she signed obviously in the Super League, and it's kind of a weird example, but I would say top 5, top 10 probably, yeah. I mean, I'm kind of racking my brain as to who else is on that list, and I don't think there's anybody in the top 10 that I don't think is unaccounted for. I think top 20 maybe a little bit, but top 10 I think everybody's pretty much accounted for.
Trinity Byers was the pick that most analysts agreed would probably be the number 1 overall pick had a draft taken place, or at the very least top 2, top 3. She's SEI right now out of Texas, when she was the first player to sign with the San Diego Wave all the way back in early November before the playoffs had even started. Why do you think that Byers got a deal or wanted to get a deal done so quickly?
Injury status. I think if she was healthy, she probably would have signed really quickly, after everything was done. But, there was no reason for her not to sign. I don't think her draft status is going to take a hit because of the injury. And obviously San Diego didn't, see any concern with it. But, once she was out for the season confirmed, there was really no reason why not to sign, because she's not coming back to college.
And where would you sort of rate Trinity Byers as far as if she was the presumptive number 1 pick among number 1 picks we've had entering the NWSL in recent years?
I don't think she'd be on the Crystal Dunn level, but she's definitely in that second tier. I think she's absolutely worthy of a number 1. I mean, there's some years when there are number 1 picks that, you would say, and in any other year, they'd probably be 3 or 4. But, to me, Byers is absolutely worthy of a number 1 pick. Is she a can't miss? I don't think so. It's just because I don't think there are that many prospects out there that are can't miss, especially with the injury. But, I absolutely think she's definitely worthy of being a number 1 pick.
Who's your top 5 in terms of college prospects who are now going pro this year?
If it wasn't Byers, it would have been Trinity Armstrong. It's kind of tough because if the draft was still in place, we don't know if, more players would be coming out after 1 or 2 years. But I think I'm pretty safe in feeling Trinity Armstrong, would have been number 1 or number 2. I like Lily Reel. I think Lily Reel's pretty much been scouted as, one of the best center backs in the college game for probably 2 or 3 years now. I think Quincy McMahon is really good. I think she would have been definitely the first fullback off the board. I don't think she was, kind of hyped up as much as Lily Reel early, but I think later on, as her career kind of progressed, she definitely got a lot of attention. I think Lexi Missimo is definitely on that list in terms of top 5. And then, I mean, for the other spot, I probably would have guessed either Taylor Huff or Hannah Bebar. I think I could have seen them maybe potentially slip, top 10 or so. But if it was my list, in terms of top 5, I think that's probably where I put them, around that area.
Missimo represents a very interesting case study, not just because she signed with Dallas Trinity FC in the USL Super League, taking some people by surprise, but also that she was heavily rumored to potentially declare for the draft last year, chose instead to stay at Texas. We were talking a little bit off mic about NIL deals. It seemed from the outside that there was just a really good NIL deal on the table for Missimo last year, and that kept her in college for another season. What's your read on Missimo more generally, both in terms of why she may have ended up at Dallas now as opposed to somewhere else, and why she seems just really devoted to the Texas Forever lifestyle from birth to now?
I mean, I think she's going to be in Europe in August. I think she may have heard from European clubs basically saying, we can't bring you on right now, but we're willing to bring you in So you get an entire preseason, building up to that. I appreciate her doing a solid, for Dallas Trinity, obviously, with the links there. But she basically has said her goal is to make the U.S. women's national team. And I don't care what Chris Petroselli or anybody there says, you're not going to make the women's national team by being in the USL Super League. And I mean, there's nothing, in her profile that it would indicate that she's not extremely ambitious and wanting to get to that very top level. So I think she's going to score a lot of goals, however many games she plays over the next, couple months in the USL. And then I think, it's going to be interesting to see where she ends up, probably in Europe, come August.
So do you think she avoided signing for an NWSL team explicitly so she could go to Europe later in the year? Is that your theory of the case?
I really don't know. It may be a situation where she may have sent feelers out, to European clubs, and she may be basically saying, well, I think I can get a better deal, in Europe, whatever that better deal entails in terms of money, development, etc. I don't know why she would explicitly avoid NWSL right now, just because you can choose your landing spot now. But, it does seem like she's going to end up in Europe, barring some really, really weird 11th hour surprise.
What makes Chris so unique is how much data on the college game he's able to release into the public sphere and help people understand, at least from a data-centric point of view, how to analyze college performances, which is so difficult given the wide variation in quality, both at the team and at the conference level. We went one step further and we looked at data from Y-Scout, isolating just games that players faced ranked teams, either by United Soccer Coaches or by Top Drawer, whoever was on a top 25 list by the end of the season. We wanted to see how players measured up when they were playing the best available competition. What we found was that Missimo, in just a little bit less time in terms of minutes played than Taylor Huff against ranked teams, really did not seem to measure up to a player like Huff's level, at least by this analysis. Byers was not by her side for a great deal of Texas's season. There's always the challenge when you don't get as many strong games against strong opposition as maybe somebody like Huff at Florida State in the ACC can. But it really jumped out to me that maybe Missimo might not have been able to completely write her own ticket, that maybe NWSL front offices were seeing something in the data that made them less than enthusiastic compared to somebody like Huff, who Bay went after and got back in January. Is that nonsense? Was there anything to that? Or do you really feel like Missimo is the type of player who really could control her own destiny here?
I mean, she's a good player, but for me, the big bugaboo is that she doesn't defend. If you look at the Y-Scout data, overall, her per 90 defensive duel numbers is 1.20 attempts or 1.19 attempts per 90 minutes. That's not challenges won, that's attempts. And it's been something that's, kind of hung over her career, basically for her entire career. And I think, in a league where the midfield is really combative, like the NWSL, I think some teams could definitely see that as a liability. At the same time, though, I think you can scheme around it. If you have a strong 6 and a strong 8, you can win challenges. You can scheme around Missimo not willing to defend. And I mean, she could still always grow in terms of actual defensive challenges. Once she reaches the pro level, you don't really know how much of it is down to scheme and how much of it is down to player. But, I think that's a definite concern that I think some teams would have, but I think there's enough there that there definitely would have been interest in more than one NWSL team to bring her on.
Missimo is playing in the SEC. Do you think for players there is a distinct conference to choose to play in the strongest? The SEC is maybe not it. Is it the ACC at this point?
It certainly was last year.
It's kind of interesting when we see, as an example, Deborah Abiodun getting loaned out, signing with the Spirit and then getting loaned out to the Trinity. And I'm like, she's probably would have seen better competition had she stayed at Pittsburgh, just because, the ACC is just, it's the cauldron. It's, the proving ground for women's college soccer. It's basically better than all the other top power conferences combined. I mean, I think the Big Ten, has made some strides adding USC and UCLA, and, the SEC's okay. But if you want to prove yourself, at the very, very top level of college soccer, you're playing in the ACC.
Moving to the pro game for a second, it seems like one of the big changes that has occurred is with the removal of the draft is that of the players that you listed in your top 5, 3 of them are going to the San Diego Wave, 2 of them are going to Bay FC, and the one other player that was sort of floating around there is going to Gotham. Are you surprised by this sort of uneven distribution of top talent to clubs?
I mean, a lot of players want to live in California and New York. They're very, very nice places to live, for a lot of these players. So I'm not really super surprised at kind of the distribution there. But I mean, San Diego had a need, in terms of players. They didn't have like a very, very deep roster, and they got rid of players too, like in the offseason. So, I'm not surprised there. In terms of Bay Area, I think they had a need for midfielders. So I'm not really shocked that Taylor Huff and Hannah Bebar went there. I'm not super surprised in terms of, where some of the top names ended up going.
Speaking of Bebar, you and I were actually chatting on social media, Chris, about why she was out on the market for so long. Can you elucidate why a player whose profile is incredibly strong for Duke at an ACC team, who went deep in the College Cup, who was named as a replacement on the senior U.S. women's national team January camp rather than the Futures camp, but only signed very, very recently, was in fact the 29th and most recent college player to sign. You mentioned to me that it might have been because some teams were turned off at not getting a full preseason camp with her because she's finishing up her master's degree in Raleigh-Durham. So why do you think that would have been such a concern for some clubs when you have the talent profile that Bebar does? Like for me, if I were a GM, I just wouldn't care. I'd get Bebar as soon as possible if I had a needed central midfield.
I just don't know how like a lot of these GMs think. I mean, I'm kind of your mind, like, I'm making an investment in the future. At the same time, I don't think she's coming cheap. She's a top 5 or a top 10 value. You're probably paying her a decent amount of money. And if you're paying her a decent amount of money, you probably want her for an entire season, especially because some of these clubs have coaches and GMs who are, on the hot seat and they want to win absolutely like right now. So I think, it may have affected some of them basically saying, well, why are we going to spend, top 5, top 10 money on a player who's going to be here for like half the year and, who may need time to integrate into the system. I think her skill set is really good for integrating pretty fast just because even if she's not going to be passing the ball really, really at a top level right away, I mean, she's a great ball winner, and a lot of these teams could use ball winners, right away. So I don't know why she took a while to sign. It might be an agent thing. It might be her just taking her time and weighing all of her options. She might have gotten offers overseas too, that she might have felt out, in the run up to the end of the international transfer window. So we don't really know, but I think it's a really good fit, her ending up in the Bay Area. And, I think, all good things are to come to those who wait. And I think she's going to do really well for them.
Yeah, Bebar fills the immediate void left by the trade of Alex Loera to Utah. So it feels like there's a winnable starting 11 spot available to her right off the bat. Are there any other players you see coming out of the college game that have landed in spots that you think that's a great, great fit for them?
I think Ella Haas at Louisville, I think more than anything, just because they desperately need a left back. I don't think Ella Haas is a top 10 player in this class, but at the same time, once you get beyond that very first tier of players who, are going to get minutes no matter what, a lot of it is down just to fit. And I mean, in Louisville, honestly, I think they needed more than just like a left back, but I think the immediate need is there. And I think she can win that starting job right out of camp. Just because I don't think there's like a ton of great options there. I like Macy Hodge at Angel City. I mean, they definitely need some steel in midfield. I think they've needed that for a while now. I'd like to see how well she combines with Katie Zellum, kind of in the center of the park. Maybe it frees Zellum up, to be a little more attacking. I like Manaka Hayashi at Chicago just because they desperately need midfielders that can pass the ball. It seems like it's all destroy. And I think some of the tough things, with some of these players like Manaka Hayashi is just like, they played like half a season, in college because they were essentially at the Youth World Cup. So we don't really know what all they can provide. But, just from what we saw from her at Santa Clara last year, I think she's a really good fit. Dependent on how they want to play. And, I'm hoping they want to pass the ball a little bit more. but I think she's a pretty good fit, for what they want to do.
Let's go back to Macy Hodge for just a second. She might have the most unique development pathway of anybody who's signed so far in this offseason. Obviously, taking time off for mental health reasons. At one point, thought she was going to be out of the game. Eventually landed at Mississippi State. What do you make of Hodge and how she's been able to get her career to this point where she might be one of the most tenacious and graft-heavy central mids to sign in this window?
I mean, she definitely fit the Mississippi State program and kind of the ethos of what they were trying to build. If you're the bottom end of the Power Four like Mississippi State was, you need midfielders like Macy Hodge who can win the ball, who can destroy, who can serve as a leader. Like you said, just really, really unique developmental curve. She was basically out of the game for a very, very long time. Once they're out of the game, they don't really develop into, a pro level. I think Megan Reed was a great example, also of Angel City, who, kind of fell off the radar for a while. And then, all of a sudden is back at pro level. The really interesting thing with Macy Hodge is she's going to be 24, basically really early on in this season. And I don't think we've got like a big enough data set yet, just because we're only like in 11th, 12th year of the NWSL. I think we're going to see, potentially more and more teams, taking younger players, who are coming out after 1 or 2 seasons. Is it going to be like an NBA effect where players that are in 4th or 5th year, are automatically dinged because they're older and there's this theory that their ceiling isn't as high? But at the same time, I think she plays a perfect position in terms of, well, it doesn't really matter how old you are if you can win the ball and distribute the ball, at a pro level.
Are there players that you feel like have ended up in spots that are confounding or confusing for you, or just terrible fits based on what you know about their college play?
I'm a little confused about what Kansas City is doing. I think Claire Gagne is an okay keeper. I don't think she would be in my top 5 for this class. I think recency bias is a killer with goalkeepers. You always remember like the senior year instead of the previous years. I think she's got potential, but for me, she's a player I would be loaning out. But I just don't understand really why, they're signing Mary Long and Katie Scott. I know there's the familial connection with Mary Long, but, you look at those two players and like I said, they played half a season and I don't think either of them looked anywhere close, to being a contributor. And they're kind of stuck in this developmental, kind of black hole where how are they going to improve if they're not playing? And this kind of ties into a deeper issue that I think a lot of NWSL teams have where they're signing these players with the under, 18 mechanism, and then they're playing like 200 minutes a season. And you can basically say all you want, well, they're in a professional training environment, but, if they're not playing games, they're not improving and they're not going to hit their potential. And I don't know what the solution is, especially if you're bringing in players like at 15 and 16. Well, you can't loan them out, obviously, and there's no reserve league, so they basically can't, play that. There's no secondary cup competition anymore, so you can't give them minutes there. It's just, I think it's a really big developmental question, and we've seen some of the end results, so far in the league. It just seems like for every Claire Hutton success story, there's like 3 other stories where it's not going that well, in my opinion. So Kansas City, in my mind, I have questions on how they're going to develop some of these players like Katie Scott and Mary Long that, just did not have a lot of college experience.
Yeah, Katie Scott doesn't turn 18 till June, which is wild. To bounce off of Katie Scott and loop back maybe somebody like Trinity Armstrong, what motivates players that young to be one and dones? Why do you think Scott felt like this could be the time? I think Armstrong, it speaks for itself. She's got a lot of upside. But for somebody like Scott, why is going professional and starting a professional season at the age of 17 after being at Penn State for only a year the most optimal decision for her development, do you think, in her mind?
It may be something as simple as, well, she just would rather be a full-time soccer player than being a student. I remember like somebody like close to a team DM'd me one time and basically, made that argument. And we kind of forget about, that time as well. Just some of these players want to be playing competitive soccer or the opportunity, like basically for the entire year. In the college season, it's 4 months. It might be money, it might be, they don't feel like they're developing enough. One thing that might be in play too is you look at like Olivia Smith, who, did not make an impression during her brief time with Penn State. And now she's at Liverpool and she's one of the most talented young players in the world. So, college is not the be all and end all. It's going to be different for every player. At the same time, they might have an agent in the ear basically saying, well, you've got, this offer coming in from a pro team, and you're going to end up making more money, through that than say NIL for 4 years. So why don't you give it a shot? But it differs for every player. I don't agree with a lot of the decisions, but we're still very early in the process. We don't know how this is going to work out in the long term for a lot of these teams and players.
In the short term, we have 100 players who were with an NCAA team last year who are now professionals as of February 10th, 2025. 100 players who have signed professional contracts, not just with the NWSL, but also the Northern Super League in Canada, the Damallsvenskan in Sweden, USL Super League, Liga MX Femenil, on and on and on. At this point, a year ago, 39 college players had signed professional contracts. And it wasn't until early April that we finally got over the 100-player line last season. To my mind, this has been a wild success from the player's point of view to eliminate the draft, because it seems to me, especially knowing what we know about the USL Super League's minimum salary, the no trade clause plus the $50,000 minimum in the NSL, and improving paydays and working conditions in a lot of other leagues around the world, it seems like this is getting more money in the pockets of more college players than a draft-based system could ever dream of doing. If the thing that's most important to you is to make sure that players are actually being paid to be professionals, this is working. I also know from some conversations and from your general social media profile, and also the fact that you come from the college game, that you don't necessarily have as massively enthusiastic an opinion of how this is all unfolded. So I'm wondering, Chris, what has your opinion been about this new draft-free world that we live in?
I think the one thing is I want more data, because this is a double class. This is basically an outlier class, because this is basically the last bonus year class from the COVID years, and this is the first post-bonus year class. So you basically have double the number of players available. And yeah, there's a couple of medical redshirts in there, but for all intents and purposes, it is double the number of players. Beyond that, I would question, well, how do we define professional? NWSL is definitely professional. USL Super League, I'm going to be very interested to see what it looks like in year 2, because we have teams in the USL Super League that are averaging like 2,000 or fewer attendance. In my mind, that's not sustainable, especially when we have some teams basically putting together rosters of like 25, 30 with a minimum salary, like you said. And I think if you look at the other pro levels, the level varies widely. You have known quantities in France, in England, et cetera. But at the same time, you have teams in other leagues that are, a little bit less developed in terms of, I'd be really interested to see what their salaries are like, there, to be honest. So I would probably wait for another couple of years to see, kind of draw large conclusions to it. I think without question, for the very, very, very upper class, it's absolute boom for them. As I pretty much thought it would be. I think they are absolutely benefiting 100%. The other thing I'm going to be really interested in to see is like how many of these NIL players, that are with NWSL teams right now end up signing, either with the NWSL or with teams outside of the NWSL, because I think then, you could see this number swell to like 150, 175, 200 really easily in the summer. I think the thing to remember too is that some of these players that have not signed are probably still finishing up their degrees. So I think we're going to see a lot more players sign in the summer window as well. But again, I think browsing over the list that you sent me, it's really interesting because, it really runs a wide gamut of players from, 5-star, superstar, All-Americans to, players that are a little bit lower down on the totem pole. And I think, if you're getting that wide mix and it's not just like power 4 players, I think that can only be a good thing for the game. And that was really one of my major concerns, that, teams were going to default just to power 4 teams, but it doesn't really look to be the case. It looks to be, a lot of players from smaller conferences too are getting a shot at many different levels.
The USL Super League, as you mentioned, that's a real wait and see, as you allude to, in terms of what level of success it's going to be able to bring. But between them and the NSL in Canada, which certainly talks a big game about financial sustainability and taking care of players, and certainly has a a higher, I think its minimum salary this year is even higher than the NWSL's minimum salary. Between the USL Super League and the NSL, we're looking at 25 players that have signed out of college up to this point. With setting aside the long-term sustainability question, which may be foolish, could we argue that their presence has ensured, as you say, a wider, more diverse collection of players from a bunch of different class levels to feel like they have the opportunity to take their careers to the professional level that maybe they wouldn't have felt before if they thought they were only going to maybe get drafted in the 4th round and not get signed out of camp or not get drafted at all, for example?
It's more teams and more roster spots. I think the thing with the Northern Super League is that it really fills the need that Canada has had literally for ages, in terms of, well, if you're not at the very, very top level, well, how do you continue your professional career? Because I've seen, I've been around, college soccer for like well over a decade, and, the list of Canadian players, who were really, really good in college, but who just could not find a professional opportunity was massive. And then you basically look at some of these rosters, right now, there's only 6 teams, of course, but you look at some of the rosters and it's hard to argue that it's not filling this huge need in Canadian soccer. And there's some pretty good American players, in the college game, latching all these teams as well. Julia Lease, for example, was All-American at Georgetown, basically played in Sweden for a little bit, and she's back, in Canada now. Some former NWSL players are getting in the league now with Jasmine Spencer and Nikki Stanton, for example. So I just think it's a really good thing that there are these other options out there, and it's creating more competition, for these players' signature, and it's keeping more of them in the game for a longer time.
I think I'm probably a little more reserved in my judgment, a little bit more like you, Chris, where I'd like to see how all of this shakes out. And also the landscape of global women's soccer just is really malleable right now. That said, if the top end talent is getting scooped up, as it always would be, do you still see places where players are falling through the cracks, both in the college game and connecting into the professional game?
Even though there's more opportunities for players outside of the top 4 conferences, I still think there is a little bit of an anti-Power 4 bias in terms of teams not really giving a serious thought to anybody outside of the Power 4 conferences. Which is why, I was kind of happily surprised that the Spirit, signed Emma Gaines-Ramos, for example, from San Diego State. There's some players like Pietra Torton, with the Thorns, coming out of Princeton, who are always going to get signed. But, I think we're seeing some back-end Power 4 players go ahead of some players that I think I would have ranked a little bit higher. At the same time, though, I do think there's a little bit more concentration of talent, towards the upper 4 conferences. And the thing really to watch is, well, what's the situation going to be like in college soccer with the House case getting settled?
Can you fill in the listeners on House versus NCAA and how that settlement came to be, and also what drove that lawsuit in the first place for listeners who might not know?
Well, I'm not a lawyer.
As best you can, Chris.
Basically, we're in a situation where, House is Grant House, swimmer, I think like Arizona State. And he's basically said, he's not for some of the end results out of this in terms of things like roster limits. But what it basically says is that, athletes that lost out on opportunities for NIL and stuff in the past are going to get compensated to a varying degree. So, mostly men's basketball and football players are going to get essentially back NIL pay. And then schools are going to be able to directly share revenue with athletes if they opt into the settlement, which pretty much everybody that plays big time football will. So everybody that plays in like FBS is probably going to opt in, and some conferences like the Big East are going to opt in as well. Whether that's a good idea or not is another conversation. But mainly we're going to see schools sharing all the way up to $23 million at the start of it. Most of this money, because they're pretending Title IX doesn't apply, even though there are objections to that, which are going to get settled. They're basically saying, well, Title IX doesn't apply. We're going to funnel most of that money to men's basketball, men's football, probably a little bit of women's basketball as well, and maybe gymnastics and volleyball for schools that place a priority on it. Meanwhile, you basically have all these schools having to think, well, how in the world are we going to bring in an extra $23 million a year and balance the books. And if you look at schools like UCLA, Ohio State, they're running deficits, in 8 figures right now. And, they're basically saying, we'll find a way. And they probably will for the first year. But the second check and every check after is much harder because there is this enthusiasm gap. And so a lot of these ADs are basically saying, to prioritize and to deal with roster limits and all this new math, you're going to be tiering sports. And what that essentially means is you have to decide what sports you want to actually put your financial muscle behind. Obviously, for pretty much every school, that's going to be men's basketball, football, women's basketball. And then I would guess next in line are baseball, softball, women's volleyball, and gymnastics in whatever order, you want to put those in. Everybody else is probably going to be out of luck and are probably going to be dealing with massive cuts in terms of the number of scholarships they're going to be, giving out. I don't think teams are going to go all the way up to 28 scholarships, full scholarships in women's soccer, no matter what coaches are saying right now. I just think, the math doesn't really work out that way. But I do think it might be a case of haves and have-nots where you might have, a team with 18 or 20 scholarships and you might have another with 8 or 10 or even less, just because their ADs haven't really tiered, a program that highly. And then if that happens, I think, we might be seeing a lot more players from a lot fewer teams, being the ones that get these top-level pro opportunities.
Do you feel like in years past that the draft or via undrafted signings or NRI signings, do you feel like non-Power 4 players had more opportunities to potentially go pro in a pre-2025 universe?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit. It's kind of weird, though, just because there may have been more opportunities for that in the past, but the scouting and the intelligence that teams are getting now is so much better than it was at the very beginning of NWSL or even at the end of WPS. I remember covering some of those drafts, and I was like, what in the world are these coaches looking at? So I think the opportunity is a little bit less, these days, but I think those that do get taken have a better chance of success just because I think coaches have a more realistic view of who can make it and who can't right out of college.
There was a sense when the CBA came out that I think among college soccer fans, or at least some that I had seen online, that this was a the sky is falling moment, potentially, the absence of the draft. Months out now, how do you sort of see the future of the college game in relation to the pro game?
I mean, if the sky is falling in college soccer, it's not because of the CBA. I mean, just from what I've seen in college soccer, there's probably 5-10 issues a lot more pressing than, there's not a draft anymore.
So what are some of those?
Oh, well, I think, you're basically going to have a lot of teams being told, because of the House case, we don't see you as a priority anymore. You're basically going to run like a club sport, maybe with 5 or 6 full scholarships. Good luck distributing that to 28 players because we're opting in and we're having the 28 player roster limit. I also think, from a developmental standpoint, this is the really funny thing when Emma Hayes basically says, we want to give a college coach or somebody representative in college a seat at the table as we try to remake women's soccer globally, but especially in the U.S. And I'm like, college soccer has a lot of programs and I don't think they see U.S. soccer as, a friend right now. I think in a perfect world, soccer is played over 2 semesters and you space things out. But if you even bring that issue up, coaches go nuts. They're like, no, we don't want this. The players don't want this, etc. I don't think it's possible at any rate just because it's a slippery slope. If soccer gets it, then I think baseball and softball will ask for it and then everything just melts down. But there's got to be a solution to it just because I think soccer is just kind of dying on the vine at the college level here. The championship game is basically being played in mid-December. And I'm like, how is that attractive to anybody? And now they're basically going to be scooping together the men's college cup and the women's college cup in one weekend. You're playing 6 games in 4 or 5 days on a field in mid-December where it's going to be absolutely garbage at the end. It's not attractive. Nobody wants to really sit out. How are parents even going to get to these games with airplane tickets on very short notice, in December? They've done a really poor job of marketing the game. I hear some people saying, college soccer needs its Caitlin Clark. Well, they had Katarina Macario a couple of years ago, and they absolutely blew it. We could probably spend an hour, on the ills that are plaguing college soccer right now. But, somebody tells you, the draft being gone is the biggest problem. It's not. It's not anywhere near the biggest problem that college soccer faces right now. And depending on how bad things get, we could see lots of schools ending up cutting teams. And, the really, really scary thing, I think, is you're basically hearing a lot of schools and a lot of conferences playing footsie with private equity. If private equity gets involved, they are profit vampires. All they care about is making profits. They're going to come in and they're basically going to say, well, if you're not actually bringing in revenue, which most women's soccer teams aren't doing because they don't charge money for tickets, you got to go. I don't need to tell you that would be a very, very bad thing for soccer in this country at different levels. If you have a lot of women's college teams getting cut, well, that means less scholarships out there. If there are less scholarships out there, parents are going to be a lot less willing to spend tens of thousands of dollars on youth soccer, which means youth soccer teams get cut. Less teams, less jobs, less competition, death spiral, lots of bad outcomes.
So now the sky is falling, is what you're saying.
It's looking pretty ominous.
Before we let you go, Chris, of all 100 players who we've got here who have inked deals, and this can be an NWSL player or it could not be an NWSL player, but we've thrown a bunch of names out. We know the more high-profile players who are in the mix. Who do you think, and you can isolate it to just their rookie season. We don't even need to do like a big, long career look here. Who do you think is going to have the most impactful rookie season in this group of 100 players? Maybe not a Croy Bethune level of impact, but who can do that besides Croy Bethune? Who do you think could really pull focus here?
Well, sorry, NWSL fans. I'm going to go with, somebody out of the league. I think it's Helena Sampaio. Really a player that I was kind of shocked she signed in Sweden just because I was like, she's very, very overqualified for Sweden. I think she is absolutely going to kill it there. And I think it's only a matter of time before, one, she's with the Brazilian women's national team and then, on to a bigger and better league. I was really, really disappointed that she did not stay in the NWSL just because I think she's a top 10 pick, easy. And I think she could have had a great, role in the midfield somewhere in the NWSL. And I just think, in Sweden, I think she's going to do an amazing job. I think she's going to have a great rookie season, all things being considered.
I mean, Gothenburg is beautiful this time of year, so, it's hard to say no to that. You can read Chris' stuff at Woso Independent. Chris Henderson, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, guys. I hope you learned as much from that as I did. I think Chris offers tremendous insight. He's a great follow.
And really great, again, because he releases college data from Y-Scout that you're just not going to find anywhere else in his high-profile public platform. So really, really significant for the general public, but also for us, and helped me figure out a way in on isolating ranked teams in my own data analysis of college players. Go ahead and follow Chris if you're not already. Follow us on Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube at XOwnGoals. That's the letter X Own Goals. If you think we've made an own goal, please email us at expectedowngoals@gmail.com. That's the letter expectedowngoals@gmail.com. Do all the things you do with podcasts if you haven't done so already. Tell all your friends about us. Follow us. Rate us 5 stars. Drop a review in your podcatcher of choice. And College Week continues apace on Patreon with a very special guest, we hope.
Talk soon, guys.
Bye.
Bye.